Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. Super excited for this one today. It's going to be a fantastic conversation. We have three wonderful panelists that know the stuff inside and out. And what we are covering today is how to transform your sales coaching from ad hoc to a structured program. And the three that we have on this panel today know the stuff inside and out. We got some great talking points. We're going to have some great takeaways, insights, incitable, actionable outcomes as well. So everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Let me introduce our panel. Okay, we've got three of the thought leaders in the space for this specific topic on how to transform your sales coaching from an ad hoc structure to a much more structured program. So Ariel, John, and Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today to bless us with your knowledge.
Mikey, you're putting a lot of pressure on us. I tend to think of myself as not so much a thought leader, but the leading mistake maker in this area. So hopefully folks will learn from what I did right, as well as all the mistakes we made along the way.
Perfect. That's great. That's what we love to hear here. So it's awesome. We're on the right track. Okay, great. Well, thank you three for staying here and being with us today. But before we dive into the conversation, I do like to kind of give a bit more information around our panelists to our audience who might not know who you guys are. So please, if you don't mind, just giving us a bit of background, what you're all about, what you do, who you are, so our audience can get a bit more acquainted. And Ariel, I will start with you. Ariel Hitron, he's the CEO and founder of Second Nature. Ariel, I know you know this stuff inside and out, so super excited to have you here. Please just give a bit more background on who you are, what you're all about, so our audience can get a bit more acquainted.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. My name is Ariel Hitron, co-founder CEO of Second Nature. And before that, I did sales leadership roles, led a team of salespeople. And before that, I was many years in product, so I can see this problem from multiple facets. Today at Second Nature, we're doing a lot of coaching and scaling up coaching in organizations with a lot of salespeople. So I'm really passionate and excited about the topic that we have to discuss here today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Ariel. Really happy that you're here with us today. Really excited to hear what you have to say about this topic here. Secondly, Susan Greenberg, she is the Global Pre-Sales Readiness Lead at SAP. Susan, thank you so much for being here. Please just give our audience a bit more background on who you are, what you're all about, so we can get to know you a bit more.
It's my pleasure to be here. I am responsible for learning and enablement for our over 3,000 pre-sales employees globally. So those are the solution consultants who do the demonstrations and have to keep up both on a very technical basis along with all of the sales. And I've been with SAP for over 10 years in this role for the last 3. And it's been really exciting as we've seen training and enablement change over the last 3 years at SAP, particularly through COVID.
Wow, fantastic. 3,000 employees, that's quite the number. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this topic as well, as I'm sure you're quite experienced with this. Last but not least, John Shea. He is the founder of Scale GTM. Thank you so much for being here today, John. Really excited to have you. Please just give us a bit more background around yourself, who you are, what you do, and what you're all about.
Yeah, thanks, Mikey, and thanks to Sales Hacker too for continuing to promote this profession and helping us all get better together. Prior to Scale, I'm the president and founder of Scale GTM. Prior to Scale, I spent the better part of the last 2 decades in various marketing, sales, and product roles. From 2012 to 2019, I actually built the enablement function from the ground up at DocuSign. We scaled the field organization from less than 100 employees in 2012 to over 2,000 globally by the time I left, from a $25 million a year business to now a global multi-billion-dollar business. And I meant it. I said earlier, I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and this is really one of the reasons, and seen a lot of things. So this is one of the reasons why I founded Scale in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, because I wanted to help other companies who are at various stages along that journey be able to accelerate through that and avoid some of those common errors and help them identify patterns. And I already see some great comments from folks like Elizabeth, who joined a startup with 150 companies and looking to build a coaching program. So Elizabeth, hopefully we'll get a chance to address how you can get started right from the ground up. And Angelica talking about how to be a better leader. And I think this is actually, hopefully we'll get a chance to touch on this topic too, which is, I think, we often think about coaching for individual contributors, but we don't necessarily think about what leadership coaching might look like as well. So hopefully those are great comments from the folks who are attending. So keep those comments coming in, and hopefully Ariel, Susan, and myself will have an opportunity to address these throughout the rest of the session today.
Awesome, John. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know I certainly have made a lot of mistakes in my past too. That has definitely helped me shape my future. So I think that's, the best way of learning, right? So really excited.
Learn. You got to always learning and getting better day after day.
Exactly. If you're not learning, then what are you doing, right? So great to hear. Really excited to hear what you guys have to say about what we're speaking to today. Okay, so now that we know you guys much better, let's dive into the whole point of why people are here today. Okay, so to start it off, I'll start off with just a question that we can kind of go from here. So we've done the research, and we have found out that data-driven coaching can increase your open pipeline up to 3 times or 3x. Okay, I would love to hear kind of your past experiences or what you're doing now that has helped you see this kind of increase in your coaching programs. Ariel, I'll start with you to take it off, and then we'll kind of go around.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mikey. So I think, it really depends on the goals that you're setting. And I think Open Pipe is a great goal because you can see it really quickly. It's more of a leading indicator than anything else. And it starts off by defining what would make the difference in a coaching plan. Maybe it's skills, like opening skills, discussion skills, qualification skills. Maybe it's more of a product knowledge, depending on the products or solutions that you're selling. Getting the reps comfortable, kind of asking the questions and presenting the value proposition of the different products that they have. And I think that going beyond the obvious, I think that our job as sales professionals is very much tied to the way that we're managing conversations, right? It's about how we're interacting with other people. And it's about the confidence that we have that we interact, and our knowledge, not only of our products and the industry, but of the needs of various people's various buyer personas or typical needs that we can see in front of us and we can help identify. So if you're looking for, say, Open Pipe, and we've seen that with the companies that we're working with, it's about coaching the people on identifying and listening carefully to those signals that signal the need, asking the different types of questions, whether those are situation questions or problem questions, implication questions, and so on, to identify that need and gain the opportunity to present the solution. Yeah. And again, bring it back to the conversation. So you can coach on many things or allow people to kind of passively read things or experience it, watch videos and whatnot. But I think that as much as you can bring it to an interactive session, interactive environment, learning by doing and getting feedback throughout that process would help that. And we've seen that work with our customers, that once reps gain confidence in, say, a new product that has been launched and making sure they're confident talking about it, then you'd see an uptick in new opportunities and new pipeline opened up.
Yeah. Yeah, I love your point around, really asking the right questions to figure out what the need is for the coaching in the first place, because everyone might have different needs in terms of what they're needing at the time, right? So I love that point. John, I'll send it over to you. How have you kind of, helped increase companies that you've worked with in the past, pipeline and kind of figured out data-driven coaching that has helped increase productivity with your teams?
Yeah. Maybe I'll just build on what Ariel just talked about. And I think the key word there, Ariel, that you mentioned was conversations, right? Ultimately, like this concept of conversational readiness. And if I, coach, if I put on my like my sales hat, my sales empathy hat as a seller, right? If I think about my day to day, and I'm getting bombarded with the latest, product enhancements and launches from the product team. I'm getting new marketing collateral being sent to me via email. And then maybe I'm talking to my manager or some of my peers and they're telling me, hey, I did this on this deal and this really unlocked this thing for me. It's a lot of information consumed, right? And so one of the things that when we think about this, how do we start to help sellers organize this information so that they're ultimately conversational ready, right? Because if I think about all this and I think about my past experiences, all this information is great. And I think to myself, this is really cool, but it's too much. And when I go back on do my next call or write my next email, I just go back to doing the old thing, right? Because all that information was nice, but it was too much. I'm not ready. I'm not conversational ready. I'm not email ready, etc.
Yep.
And so like one way I like to think about this is like, as an enablement professional for the past decade, it's really helping to organize around what do reps need to know? What do they need to show? And then finally, what do they need to say, right? And all three are very, very important. And how does that relate to coaching? Well, I think about the role coaching plays in this is it's literally where the rubber meets the road, right? It's taking all three of those things and connecting the dots. And we'll talk more about the approach and how we execute on that. But to me, this is why in any program, whether it's increasing open pipeline, increasing deal velocity, increasing upsell, etc., any sort of any initiative you're taking, like without the coaching component, you'll never sort of reach that end goal or that end outcome of the investment that you're making in any sort of enablement or training type effort without that critical coaching component.
Absolutely. Just to pick up on that, I think that what I found sometimes lacking in kind of this connection between your marketing and your sales team and sales enablement that sits in between is kind of breaking out this no-show say into different stages of the sales cycle, right? Because what typically goes out from product/product marketing is here's all of our benefits, here's all of our kind of personas, here's all of our objection handling methodologies or talk tracks, and breaking this down into, okay, what do you have to achieve in your first conversation, right? What do you have of all of this wealth of information? What do you have to focus on in the first conversation? And don't overdo it. Like, be modest with your goals. And if the first conversation, the goal is to schedule the demo, then don't start doing the demo. Just make sure that you get the interest, identify whatever the goals of this discussion is, right? So identify the budget owner or the need or the timeline or whatever methodology you're using, and make sure that you're done with that and you set a nice cadence for the next goal. So I think that coaching and making it conversational helps bridge that gap between the outcome of marketing and product marketing and what's happening in the sales environment.
And I'd love to follow up on something that both John and Ariel said. If you think about it, when John first introduced himself, he said, I make a lot of mistakes. And when you're talking about learning, you really learn better from your mistakes. If you do everything absolutely perfectly all the time, then you would never learn anything. You really remember when you mess it up. And what sales coaching is all about is creating that safe space and environment for people when they don't yet have that confidence to do the practice. and to make those mistakes in that safe environment with their coach, as opposed to having that disaster happen for them because they thought they were ready, but they really didn't have the confidence, and then they go out and they're not ready to handle the objections from the customer. So that's what that coaching is about, is to develop that confidence in that safe environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know, Mikey. We can go. We can just dive in and go on unless you guide us. But I think that, like for me, it's a like turning kind of gears, shifting gears a little bit. I think that what happens typically with coaching, what I've seen some organizations do, is they say, okay, so you have the manager, and the manager would coach the rep, and there's many times little guidance from kind of top, depending on the size of the organization, on what to coach on, and then conversations that are what the manager thinks of as a coaching conversation, the reps feels it's like a pipe review, right? So we're going over the opportunities we have on the pipe, and we're seeing what's going on, what's happening with this, is this coming in, is that not coming in, right? And then you end this discussion, the manager had like a great coaching session, and the rep says, no, I was giving him an update on the pipe. Yeah. So in order to, would you agree, John? Like, did you feel that as well?
Yeah, it's an interrogation. It's not a coaching session.
Yeah, it's a pipeline interrogation.
By the way, there's a place for both, right? But oftentimes the interrogation takes precedence, and we always push coaching to the backseat.
Right. And I think the urgent always takes precedence over the important, right? So it's urgent for the manager to know what's going on with the pipe, and it's less urgent to do the important stuff, which is coach the rep. And I think that default is of pipeline always. I completely agree with Elizabeth. And I think that in order to avoid that, if you have cloud in terms of kind of organizational cloud, then building some structure into that coaching, I think goes a long way. So you can think about it in two aspects. One is making the time for the reps to go through this coaching. So securing the time and saying, okay, we'll do the first Monday of the month, we'll do an hour of coaching, and here are the rules for that coaching. It has to be like frontline managers has to get some structure for it in order for it to be effective, and the time needs to be allocated so you don't kind of pick that time and throw it into something else. I think that's one thing. And I think the second thing is cadence and repeatability, right? So if you want to do a program that is structured for coaching, it's not a one-time thing. You have to commit to this, and you can start with a goal, whether it's opening more opportunities or closing larger deals or what have you, and then break it down into the components that would lead to achieving that goal. Kind of really thoughtfully think about the gaps that would help you achieve that goal, whether it's kind of doing better discovery, asking the right questions, handling objections, knowing the product, selling a solution, so on and so forth. Yeah. And then pouring that content into the structure. I'm going to put a pause here because otherwise I'll take the entire conversation.
Hey, I got a quick question here. So I know there's a lot of kind of back and forth of how much time is ideal amount of coaching for your reps. It's kind of tough to figure that out, really. But what do you guys think, on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis is a good amount of time that you should be spending with your reps to coach them? Susan, I'll start with you there. Kind of how did you allocate it when you're working with so many people? So how do you kind of make the time for everything?
Well, we actually started with what was our objective for coaching. And for us, the first one that we started with was experts who already had the technical ability and knew the technical product in and out, but were they really able to be on message with the conversation when they were given an objection? And if you asked the pre-sales experts, could they do this? They're like, of course, I handle objections absolutely all the time. And so we developed an in-person class where we went through and collected the objections, and the people went through and did role plays back and forth. And as soon as people got into that role play with a real person, they realized this is much harder than I thought that it was going to be able to do. And so after we had done this class, there became the question of how do we do that reinforcement? Because the class wasn't going to make them recognize that it wasn't as easy as they thought to handle the objections. So they identified a need. Now they needed to practice. So we had to develop a mechanism for them to be able to practice in a safe environment their objection handling, where they could do it on their own time for short periods of time on a regular basis. And that was the first trial that we made with the Second Nature bot, for us to be able to have people practice. And we saw increase in performance based on the regular practice of the messages. So even when they thought they were confident and had all the technical abilities, the practice saw a dramatic increase in people's comfort and their willingness to go and take it on.
Yeah, totally. That's fantastic.
I think that makes, like, to me, objection handling is one of these things that it's so critical to help new reps, or as you enter new markets or new industries, etc., get a handle on, right? And that, you know, it might get back to your question around like what's the right amount of time to allocate. You know, I almost think about the question a little bit differently, which is like depending on where a rep is in that journey with your company, right? That's sort of where we ramp up or ramp down the coaching, right? As we all know, like the time where you really need the most coaching is like when you right off the starting line, right? When you join the company during your onboarding process. And really that's when you should be, and I think, you know, it's really interesting, like depending on the size of your company, it doesn't, yes, some of that should come from your manager, but I think as great managers and leaders who are on this, hopefully on the call today or on the Zoom with us, it's also about like how do I leverage the other resources within my company to do that, right? So it's a little bit on us as sales leaders to go and find those proper resources, whether it's another top performer in the company that I can say, hey, like, will you invest 10% of your time, as an example, to help onboard, you know, 20 new people every month, right? And then helping that person understand that what they're doing actually is driving or scaling the performance of the entire company. So I think that's one critical time where we have to ramp up the coaching. And as sales leaders, like, it's very, very difficult. Like, while I said makes complete sense, when you actually talk to sales leaders, whether it's at DocSign or any other client, what they actually say is, what you hear is, I want them on the phone as quickly as possible, right? And so, like, what you don't hear is, I want them to get the most coaching possible to be successful, right? And these, while these two aren't necessarily directly in conflict, like, there is a fine balance there, right? So if we're serious about coaching and helping people be successful, we have to build in the time and the investment up front to help someone be successful. So that's one. I think another point, and Ariel, you and I both like have had a product background in the past, is when the company decides like a new thing is really important. We launch a new product. It's a huge opportunity to sell this new product into our existing customer base or enter a new market, sell to new industries, etc. Like, this is huge. This is another area where, like, as we think about getting the field organization ready, like, this is another area to embed coaching and investment in coaching. I don't know. I'd be curious, like Mikey, Susan, Ariel, like, what are the other, like, to help like the other sales leaders on this? Like, what are those critical points? Where do we insert more coaching?
Yeah, I would pick up on what John just said, and I think one is, and I think that's another point that we have down the line, but I'll kind of bring it up, is thinking through the KPIs of that and how do you measure that, right? Mm-hmm. So thinking about, like, you talked about rolling out new products, and you can think about how fast can you certify 80% of the reps on this new product. And even more importantly, how fast can you get to X amount of new open opportunities for this product, right? Which is turning it from an exercise of proficiency to an exercise that leads into the business metrics. And what typically happens is that it takes a very long time. You have the product ready, you have the messaging ready, you do fireside chat, you do another fireside chat, you have the specialist kind of join the calls, and still the sales teams are not kind of all over the place with this new product, right? There's some that are more forward thinking than others or risk averse than others. And I think that those are good kind of testings or KPIs for this. And then as you talk about the triggers for coaching, I think it's all of the above. Like there's for onboarding, absolutely, it's very obvious. For new products, new markets, absolutely. But sometimes it's something in the environment that changes, right? So take people are going from home now, COVID, right? So from working from the office to work from home. If you're selling something that relates to it, you have to coach and change the messaging. You have to change the environment. Now they're going to hybrid. You have to change your messaging and update everyone's. That's another thing that triggers that. And I think that overall, it's like eating your vegetable. It's like it's something that's good to be doing. And what I found that it's just improves. But what I found is that if you're trying to do it every time that you have a trigger, especially in large companies, if you have hundreds of reps, then it just gets delayed. But if you put up a cadence and you say in the first Monday of the month, there is some coaching that would happen for every rep on something, and then you fill that vehicle with content, then you have the attention of the sales team and you have their mindset that they have time allocated for it. And then you can also enforce or align the product marketing to say, well, I have to make this deadline with my content so that the sales team would be properly coached. And that puts whoever's responsible for this coaching plan more in the driver's seat, that he builds the cadence. He says, here's the cadence. Here's what happens. You have to deliver all of your information for the new product, for the new message, for the new what have you by this date. So it will make this date for coaching. If you can get the leadership support for that, I think that's great. One other point that I wanted to make is, like, there are things that we know that are good and we know that are selling, and we don't use them all that often. So think about like customer case studies. You have the marketing team who did amazing set of case studies in any company for like 20 different buyers or customers. And then the reps, they know the case studies that they closed. So they're leaning back, each one of them, most typically on the deals that he's closed, and they can tell those stories when they're meeting with customers. But I think that coaching reps on customer case studies, how we won Coca-Cola, how we won this amazing deal, right? Per the different industries that you're selling into, I think that's a very effective tool for getting more deals, getting more close rates, and so on and so forth. And I think that's sometimes escapes the main path. I think that's a tip that is worthwhile investigating or looking into.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you talk about being able to have enable these conversations, and they come up at different times, and that coaching will be able to reinforce the other methods that you have of training people on new products, new messaging, etc. And the big question that we found is with a pre-sales force the size that we do, is how do we scale the experts? Because that's been one of our big challenges. There's nothing that substitutes for being able to have that conversation one-on-one with the expert to be able to get that feeling. And that's been the challenge that we've got. Is it's great for our sales managers to say, you've gone out, you've done your certification, you're now certified in this. The question is, can that sales manager actually coach the sales rep for the new messaging when they're just learning it themselves? And what we found is that by automating this process and making it something that is consistent, we're getting a better scale. And so instead of having to depend entirely on our managers incorporating the new message and being able to do the local coaching, we found another process that we're able to do it and scale. Right.
Yeah. Hey, Mikey, do you mind? I saw a question come in from Vinay around conversational intelligence, right? And sort of what's our opinion about that. And so how to incorporate that into the coaching process, if you will. Do you mind if we spend a second on that right now?
That sounds fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I recently just did a program with one of my clients, and sort of trying to figure out the best way to. Maybe I'll just start with the framework, right, and then I'll tell you how we apply the framework. So, sort of one way that I think you can think about how coaching applies is in this framework, and I use the acronym BEACH, like going to the beach, right? I don't know. I like the visual of being at a beach, a sandy beach, the sun shining down on you. But the H, the last letter is habit, right? So ultimately, like yes, we look at the metrics, but those metrics are the result of the habits that we develop, right? So whether that's asking the right questions, it's the activity that we do, how we message, how we tailor, the research we do before we have a conversation. So these are habits, right? So that's ultimately what we're trying to get to stick, right? And the problem that we all see day in and day out is just because we talk about something, we train on something, we announce something, it doesn't actually result in any sort of change in behavior. It doesn't result in a new habit. So the BEAC part of the BEACH is, the first part is like, the first B is just benchmark, right? And by the way, right, I think like if you're a smaller company, you're thinking like, this is way too complicated. A benchmark could be simply like you asking the rep, like, hey, on a scale 1 to 10, like, what do you think is your discovery capability today? How would you rank yourself? It could be as simple as that, right? For a larger company, you can look at more sophisticated data, et cetera, et cetera. You can look at bigger benchmarks, right? But this doesn't have to be heavy, this framework. So it's benchmark. And the second thing is then, like, based on that benchmark, you create some sort of enablement plan, right? So you train them, you do a pitch certification, whatever it is, right? Objection handling, exercise, right? And then the key part that like everyone misses, so people generally do an okay job with benchmark. Everyone focuses on the enable piece. And then they say like, okay, go and try this. So that's the apply, so BEA. So that's the apply one. Right? We have to give people time to apply that. And then generally like programs die after that. Like it just falls off, right? That's it. And so what does the C stand for? C is coaching. Like you have to, once someone has applied, if you have conversational intelligence, you have to go through the analysis, listen to the calls so that you can, whether it's in person or via recorded sessions, and go back and do the coaching. And like when you get that loop, closed loop, you develop the habit. So that's benchmark, enable, apply, coach, habit, BEACH, right? And like one of my clients, Snappy, who's in the gifting, like they do corporate gifting. And it's such a cool concept, which is like like everyone in sales knows, like we send prospects gifts, right? And it's a very onerous process. Or for if you're a sales manager or a sales leader, you want to thank your employees for going above and beyond, so you send them a gift. And so they created a platform that allows you to automate that. It's more cost efficient, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not here to pitch Snappy, but fundamentally, it's a very cool tool, right? Like they love to demo it, and kudos on the leadership team for realizing, like, even though we're incredibly successful, cool doesn't, like, people don't buy a product because it's cool, because they buy a product because it fundamentally solves some sort of problem, right? So they identified that, and then basically I worked with them to go in and then benchmark. So we actually use conversational intelligence in the very beginning to sort of benchmark, like where do we see gaps, and then I help them develop a training program around that. And the training program is not like a 12-day course or 2-week offsite. It was a 3-hour session that we did over Zoom, and then gave them 2 weeks to apply that, where the reps actually then re-uploaded a bunch of it, like of their actual calls that they thought highlighted some of those changes. I went in and listened to those, and in groups of 5, so not like one-on-one, I would take like groups of 5 reps and run a coaching session, right? And I had all my notes there, and I would say, hey, Susan, like I noticed this is your style of selling. here's some things I noticed. What do you think about that? And we run through that. And by the way, Ariel's on that call. It turns out like Ariel also has a lot of those same types of challenges, or Mikey, you're on the call and you do something completely different to help solve that. So this collaborative nature of like coach, like oftentimes we think of coaching as like one-on-one mentoring, and then like we just can't like, you're like, I can't, it's not scalable. I can't do that well. Like you can think about this at like a team level, and then and when we did those things, it was really interesting. It was like, we did the training and then they applied it. And before we did the coaching, they're like, oh, John, thanks. Like I've started applying it. And then I listened to the calls. I'm like, well, you're sort of applying it, but not really. And then we did the coaching and they're like, oh, I get it. Like it's this next step. Like that final step was so critical. So kudos to like the Snappy leadership team for like investing the time to try to build like this world-class sales organization so that they can really highlight the value that gifting can have for their clients. So that's Beach in so hopefully Vinay, that helps you with your question around our thoughts and to potentially incorporate that into a program.
I love the beach.
Yeah,
love the beach. And just to pick up on that, I think that Susan talked about like scale up, and John also mentioned that you know you have to do it in teams and not in one-on-ones. And I think that has a ton of value both in one-on-ones and in teams. But if you kind of put it back into a context of an organization at the scale of SAP, that's or even smaller, even if you have like 100 salespeople, right? It's extremely hard to do these kind of programs at that scale. Mm-hmm. And where we kind of add up with Second Nature, and where we kind of plug into that process is exactly at those coaching parts and the enable parts of the beach that John mentioned. The ability to scale up that kind of practice and feedback loop through automation and AI, right? So think about the ability to try out multiple scenarios, multiple feedbacks in voice conversations, and getting the feedback. And I'm 100% in agreement with John about this is what forms a habit. Hence, you know, the name of my company is Second Nature, which is exactly making things a habit and making them kind of, it comes out naturally unaware of, right? So it's almost like what you could think about taking a parallel, like taking us away from the beach and into the music studio. Someone who's learning how to play the piano or learning how to play the guitar, and there are apps that help you do that and give you feedback on how you've done. So you want to learn a song and you try it and you're getting some feedback, and you try it again and getting more feedback. So that kind of learning process is essentially it's a coaching session, right? You're trying something, you're getting feedback, and like automation helps people play better. I think that sales is also a part of a performing art, and that's where kind of we fit into organizations like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember, John, you mentioned in our pre-call, and I think so did Susan, how coaching in the past is so manually intensive, right? So moving towards this more kind of structured, automated approach is kind of something that's almost needing to happen moving forward in order to maximize productivity from your reps and scale them at a much quicker rate, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Scaling it has definitely been our challenge, and we've been fighting how do we scale this really well. And we went through and we tried, well, let's do it where the reps video recorded it, and then they send it to their manager, and their manager gives them the feedback. And then we found the managers didn't have enough time to be able to give the feedback. So we said, well, what if we tried it and we get a peer to give the feedback? And then the peers didn't have the time to give the feedback and all of that. So we really needed to find a big solution where it seemed like you solved it, but you really needed a way to make sure that it wasn't just the act of doing the video, but that they got feedback on how it could be even better if. It's not a critical feedback that's going to crush them and destroy their confidence. It's feedback that says you're improving, and here's how you're improving. This is where you're getting better. And I think there was a question on how coaching is different from mentoring or the weekly one-on-one meetings. And I think that's the key, that coaching is continual encouragement to help them figure out themselves how to be better.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because I remember when, like, at previous jobs and stuff like that, you know, there might be one leader to, say, 8, 10 reps, right? They've got stuff to do. They've got to, you know, take calls. They've got internal stuff going on. So it's quite challenging to spend, you know, an hour with each of your reps, you know, once a week. That's a lot of your time, right? So I totally understand that, like, you know, it is quite a challenge, but I think there are a lot of new and exciting technologies out there that are really helping with that specific challenge.
Yeah, and coming from like an organizational perspective, so if you have the luxury of having like an enablement person or two, or even an entire team, such as Susan at SAP, I think one like contract, one contract you can make between sales and like a sales leader and enablement is, and this is in fact what we did at DocSign, especially on the onboarding side, which is enablement. Like, you train the team to help them like get on the track properly, and then once you do that, like, I will do the coaching, right? So we sort of like, and it's this great collaboration, which is, so like, for example, when we enable someone, we teach them the new pitch, we give them a list of discovery questions, we give them, and then we certify them on that, and then we say, hey, go do it on a call, right? And so we take that, like, we take that heavy lifting off of the shoulders of the sales manager, and we help get them a certain percentage of the way there. But then our contract with the sales leader is, once we've done that for someone on your team, like, it's your job to then like listen to their first call, or like take it to the next step to provide the appropriate coaching. And in fact, we'll even help you standardize that. Like, when you do coaching, here's like what a proper coaching structure might look like. Here are the questions you'll want to ask. Because we can't assume, like, listen, we assume, like, it's crazy. We assume sales managers just like are born and they know how to do the job, right? Like, because they're a high performer, they automatically know how to become a great sales manager. So I think that's the other thing that you can lean on, like an enablement team or another sales manager who's been through this, which is like, during a coaching session, like, what is it that you want to cover? What does an agenda look like for a coaching session? I know we haven't even touched on that. So, but net to like get scale, I think, like, think about enablement as like getting the part of the way there, and then like ultimately, like, we just, as sales managers, like, we can't like 100% pass the buck. Like, ultimately up to us to like close the loop on that.
Sure, but
Go ahead, Ariel.
I was wondering, just to follow up on that with John, like, how did you track that managers are doing it from, like, you were up top in the organizational level or corporate level, and you had quite a few managers. Like, how could you effectively turn that concept into a program that is trackable both on the manager's side?
Yeah. So when we did this at DocuSign, we actually had like the manager complete like a DocuSign form for that new hire as the last
sign off.
Yeah, and that sign off wasn't just the signature though. It was actually a form that like the manager, like, we pre-wrote that form with some questions, right? So like the question, and those questions are not meant for me, and they're not meant for the manager. They're meant for that rep, right? So like, here are the areas you did well. Here's where I'd like to see improvement. And this was so important because one of the things we discovered upon like exit, I'd love to say we're the perfect company, right? But we had people leave surprise, we had people exit the organization for all sorts of reasons. But one of the top reasons, to no one's surprise, is like, they said, when people left the organization, that my manager didn't coach, and more specifically, didn't set the proper expectations with me up front. And so this, like, coaching is related to so many different topics, but this idea of using coaching to set, like, the output of that to set expectations so that you and that employee know, like, what's expected, I think is a really interesting concept. And so that's what so Arya, to answer your question, like,
this is brilliant. I love it.
Formalize that last step. Like, you have to formalize.
I love it. I love it. I love the formalizing steps, and I think it's funny to use DocuSign itself for that. Like signing off, it makes it very official. I love it. I think that it probably worked great for onboarding. When I'm thinking about coaching, I'm thinking more of an ongoing process because the world is so dynamic. Everything changes around us. DocuSign buys like 2 companies every year, or 1 company every 2 years, and you have to train everybody and coach everybody on this new messaging. And I think that even with the onboarding, it's hard, but once you go into a cadence where you're doing it and ongoing, I yet to find the company that does it really well and consistently. And if they do, it takes a lot of toll on the managers. You need a lot of structure for that. But I think that that's amazing, like approach, and hopefully kind of the listeners will take that as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Like the accountability, like that final formalization, like the more initiatives there are, the bigger the team, the bigger the challenge or gap you'll have. And so, like, it's like any other problem. Like, either you throw more people at it, or you maybe explore like different like options around like automation and technology, right? So it's definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, there's no question. We have specifically for onboarding a pre-sales graduate academy, which is specifically for new hires, and they go through a period where they return to this academy on and off for 6 months so that they're getting that repeated coaching and that repeated interaction that Ariel is talking about. And even with the investment that SAP made in the pre-sales academy and having an entire staff of faculty who were trained to be able to do this coaching, we found the need for automation was there. And our second pilot with Second Nature was in our academy specifically so that we would be able to lessen the burden on the academy faculty. So even when we had gone through and made that investment, we still found that adding the automation component in to let them practice was going to be important. It didn't necessarily stop the person-to-person, final certification to say, yes, you're ready to go, but we helped build up their skills. And we found that the academy grads actually preferred to practice with an artificial intelligence automation because it was a nice getting back at that safe environment and not be in the pressure where they were sitting there with that academy faculty at the certification. Mm-hmm. So there was this additional advantage of it wasn't going to do that necessarily that final step, but it really helped them get prepared. And they would practice on their own 5 or 6 times, and they could see through the automation that they were getting better in telling the story and that they were scoring higher. And so that continual feedback encouraged them to do it even more until they could do it at a very proficient level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so important with the sales coaching is figuring out, and that goes back to Ariel, what you mentioned earlier with the case studies and stuff like that, figuring out the story and how do you tell that story to different, companies within different industries to make it seem how this is going to work, right? So I think
just to respond to Curtis and Amy from the chat, when they're talking about automation and what we're doing with SAP, so part of what we're delivering at Second Nature is this ability to do role plays at scale with the computer. Mm-hmm. So there's a mock buyer on the computer side that is trained or programmed to run through a specific scenario, whether it's one of your products, whether it's a skill, and help coach the reps. So it does not replace the manager's coaching, but it takes off the table a lot of the basics to make sure that the rep can articulate the value proposition, run a demo, handle objections, tell a customer story, and so on in voice conversation while getting feedback and getting scores and insights on how they can improve. So what we found with customers like SAP and Zoom and others, that they're using it as the baseline, have the reps kind of practice the new product a bunch of times until they're proficient, and then they go with their managers either in a role play scenario or with their conversational AI of recording. The managers reviews it and gives them feedback.
It's actually funny because if you talk to our academy grads, they'll say, "I talked to Jenny today." And it's really funny. Jenny has become a persona. And when other people have talked about the practice, oh, is that about Jenny? And people think of Jenny as being this additional staff member at SAP. And she's really artificial intelligence from Second Nature. She's got her own persona.
Yeah. So I know we only have about 6 minutes left, but I do want to cover one last talking point here. So with these coaching programs, structured programs, we want to measure it, make sure that it's working, right? Like Ariel, you mentioned earlier about the KPIs. How do you measure the impact of your sales coaching instead of just hoping for the best? Hey, this is going to work. It's perfect, right? How have you managed or measured the successfulness of your coaching programs in the past? John, I'll start with you to kick off the last little one here.
So I hate to sound like a broken record, but kind of like that beach metaphor or acronym that I used, it's embedded in that. To me, I think if you're a small, so actually maybe I'll think about it in a few different ways. Over time, as we built up the field organization at DocuSign, we had the privilege to buy more software and implement that. So whether that was around content or anything else, right? And then we can start to measure things like the adoption of that content, correlate it to sales outcome data. I think ultimately, this is the path that you're going to want to go down. And I think this is where solutions like Second Nature can play a huge role in helping you get there, right? Now, not everyone has headed down that path yet. So what do you so how do we take steps to get there? Well, first call Ariel after this today and have him help you. But the second to think I'd recommend starting light, in a coaching program. I assume there's a lot of sales managers on this call. I do this in every one of my sessions. I just ask someone on a scale 1 to 10, what do you think is your capability in this area? And then go through your program and ask them that same question again at the very, very end, right? Or along the way. Now ask the follow-up question, what's changed? And be critical of it too. I think it's so much of coaching is about having a conversation and asking themselves to sort of asking someone to give themselves a score is a really good light way to start. Now but I would just caveat that with as you get to an SAP sized organization, obviously the manager should still be having those conversations, but you're going to want to measure that more systematically somehow. And I think this is where you have.
We still do exactly that. We have an automated system called Equip to Engage, which asks the employees to rate themselves on their competence in particular skills. And we also have the manager rate them. And we monitor that over time to see if they're getting better. So as strange as it sounds, is even at our scale, your recommendation of asking that simple question. So how confident are you at doing this? Do you feel like you're really prepared? Are you ready? Is a really important question. And we've just taken it to another scale at SAP and have a whole system that allows them to constantly be updating their skills. And it also helps us identify if we're looking for an expert in a specific region, where would we find that person?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That's awesome, Susan.
Yeah. So I think you're right on.
I would agree. I would just add that reps proficiency could be self-assessment or manager assessment or AI assessment. I think those all are great indicators because it's very instant. You get it fast. I think that other indicators would be if you have conversational intelligence, are they changing their talk tracks afterwards? And I think that's what John was referring to earlier. If you have the manpower to look after it? Did you actually inflict the change or drive change in their actual talk track? I think that would be a little bit later. Like it takes a little bit more time to get there, a little bit more of a lagging indicator. But then later on, does it actually move the needle on the business KPIs? Did you open more opportunities? Did you increase the deal size? Did you sell the add-on products? Did you kind of, can you pull from your CRM that data and tie it back to your coaching? And I think that's also a way to gain more top level support for those initiatives.
Yeah, that's fantastic, everybody. Okay, well, we're just about at time here. John, Ariel, Susan, thank you so much for taking the time to bless us with your knowledge and give back to the Sales Hacker community. It's been such a pleasure having you guys. I want to thank Second Nature for sponsoring this webinar as well. Go check them out after. If you have any other questions for Susan, John, or Ariel, find them on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'll respond to you if you got any further questions. But with that being said, thank you all for being here. It's been super fantastic having you and hanging out with you for the last hour, and I'm really excited to do it again.